Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. This week on Beyond the Thesis, I have the great pleasure of having as my guest Tony Stubblebine, CEO of Medium, to talk about how academics and scientists in general can find their audience in an extremely noisy media ecosystem. Reaching out to non-academic audiences and sharing scientific knowledge outside the walls of the lab is more and more important for academics, and the exponential multiplication of communication channels has not helped reduce the noise, making the task that much harder. With Tony, I will try to explore what avenues and best practices the scientific community can rely on to best reach its different audiences. Tony Stubblebine, welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. It's a great pleasure to have you here today.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Tony, first, one thing I can already tell the audience: you were first a large writer on Medium, and now you're the CEO of Medium. It's quite a kind of a metamorphosis story, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. But where I want to go from here is, can you just tell the audience a little bit about you, about how you got to this the position that you are today, and then we can bridge into your interest in how how we can get scientists, academics to better communicate, to find their audience, and something that's very important today, build their authority and have their hands on the reins of what happens with scientific communication, which today sometimes is it's a bit dodgy.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's a little bit of a like Willy Wonka to my story, where like he needed someone to replace running the chocolate factory, and picked his most like enthusiastic customer. But there's a lot more to it beyond that. I'm a programmer originally. Came out of school with a computer science degree as the kind of startups were a big thing, and I'm from California originally, and so I just got sucked into the tech community and the idea that there would be ways to reinvent the future or invent a better future. Mm-hmm. And the first kind of like category of things that I got pulled into was how do we make people smarter? And I had been working really early in my career as a programmer for a publishing company, O'Reilly Media, which published technical books. But kind of the secret sauce for that company was they didn't go find writers. They went and they found professionals and taught those professionals how to be writers, which is, I think, what we're going to be talking about today. It's like it's easier to teach someone who knows what they're talking about how to communicate than teach someone who's just a great communicator how to know what they're talking about, especially when you get into really deep technical subjects, which every academic ends up in that space. So we were doing this for programmers, and we would take a professional programmer who was on the cutting edge of some technology and help them write a book, and that was the business. And this is quaint now, like who learns from books anymore? We all learn from the internet. But I was doing that right as that switch was happening, and we saw the potential for what we would call, at the time we called user-generated content, but now say blogging is like literally one of the first forms of that. Mm-hmm. Where what happens if you give everyone a voice? And originally, this was really exciting to us because we thought, the world's going to get a lot smarter. And so you see places where that's true. Wikipedia is, I think, an upgrade on encyclopedias, and that's all community driven. But I think now, 15, 20 years later, it feels like there's a lot of places where maybe the world didn't get better by giving everyone a voice. It's like got louder, more divisive. There's more misinformation. And so this is, I'm straying from my career arc, but I was a programmer, and then I was a manager, then I started a business, and then I started another business, and along the way, I just like always was writing, and just happened to be close to Medium when it launched 12 years ago, and just got closer and closer over maybe a 10-year period, to the point where I was the top user. I had like a publishing group
Mhm.
here that was representing maybe close to 2% of the traffic, which is, for a platform, that's actually a lot for one user to be representing. And so when I got a chance, when Medium was looking for another CEO, I threw my hat, so to speak, in the ring, and made the case that this lesson I learned early in my career, like we could do a better job of helping, essentially this core problem of finding readers, right? And the rest of the internet gives readers based on attention seeking, like people that are
Yes.
really good at grabbing your attention. And I thought we could build a place that gave gave distribution, gave readers to people who know what they're talking about. And like my 2 years here have really been
Mhm.
based on making a modern take on blogging that could, um, you know, uh, that could do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's true that the attention side of the spectrum, let's say attention seeking side of the spectrum,
Yeah,
really pressures for short formats,
yeah,
uh, video, some things that move, text that jumps, whatever, and it is a medium, or it's a way of communicating that's really not easily amenable to teach complex science, let's say,
right,
but general audience usually are not going to be able to read a scientific paper just out of the journal.
yeah,
And it feels to me like what you're describing is kind of a middle ground of
mm,
where can we get deeper into a subject, be it
yeah,
technical or scientific, closer to the public, but not falling onto that end
right,
of the spectrum of, oh, I need to do TikTok videos, etc. And
right.
and blogging, like you're saying, it feels to me like it's this nice, like, Goldilocks
Goldilocks, exactly.
place. Yeah.
I use that phrase a lot actually at work. It's tricky to find the just right version of these things. Um, Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I when I talk to academics, it's always like there's this like often this frustration how much you've written that didn't get read, especially when you're a student. It's like a lot of what you write just gets read by your TA. And then this other frustration about how oversimplified the mainstream media covers any topic that you happen to know about. So blogging is this like great middle ground where there's enough room for you to go in depth, but it really calls for you to explain it in plain language, right? And it's a
Hmm.
chance to do both, to show that you can teach and explain, but also get into the subtleties that are important. And so that's why I see it like that's how most academics that I see on Medium approach it. And it's not, it's yeah, I think the writing ends up, really showing the depth of, or the not just the depth, but the breadth of their understanding. So, like, when you write a paper, that can often be very deep and narrow. But when I read an academic, I'm realizing how many other papers they read, on that topic along the
Yeah.
way. Um, so yeah, it's just like it's this perfect, I think, format for mainstream communication. And then we do the thing that makes it worthwhile is we're going to bring you readers that really want to hear from you.
Mm. Now, the title today of this conversation is "Build Authority by Finding an Audience,"
Right.
and we were talking just before we started recording, and you were observing how deep, like you said, the knowledge of these specialists are, of people who have studied this long, who have done research, who have published all these papers. And you would think someone who studied all these years, has read all these papers, has written all these things, has written book chapters, etc., that automatically or automagically authority would come with that.
Mm.
And I think you are going to tell us that it's not exactly that way that it works. Can you go a little bit into that? What's the difference between just having a big, let's say, treasure of knowledge and having authority. I think they're contiguous, but there's some work that needs to be done in the middle. Can you
Yeah,
talk a little bit around that aspect of things?
I think one of the cheat codes for people's careers, and I saw this start in tech first, but it's gotten a lot broader, is to use a portfolio in place of a resume.
Mm,
A resume is like this sort of like, um, it lists your accomplishments supposedly, but it's hard to double check, right? It's hard to test for yourself. How do I feel? How is this person? What is this person's work actually like? And a portfolio gives someone who's evaluating you a chance to really get hands-on with you. And so this started originally with programmers, where it's like, okay, I want to hire this programmer. They worked at Google. That's a good sign. But a better sign would be if I could see their code, like see
mm,
the software they've written and actually look at it, right? That's a much higher signal. And so that kind of realization started with programmers who started having public portfolios. Designers do this. And then it just turns out that writing is the form of a portfolio that works for almost everyone. Write about your profession, write about your knowledge, and now you have this body of work that someone who's trying to evaluate you can look at. And so we were talking earlier about that what you've published is actually like just the tip of the iceberg of what you know about as an academic, right?
it's true.
And so it's an opportunity to show off. And then I think this is the like aha moment for most people in their careers, is they realize it's not enough to be smart, it's not enough to be right. You have to be convincing, like build, like if you're trying to take an academic career and like turn yourself into a professional, a huge amount of your success is how do you work with other people, how do you communicate with other people. And so like a paper is not enough, right? Like you have to be able to explain complicated topics in simple ways. And I think that's also a way that blogging ends up working for you as a professional portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think this is a really important but kind of narrow motivator for people to blog. Most people blog because they just have the urge. I have something to say and I want to be heard. And I don't want to say that you have to have a professional goal behind it, but I do think that is kind of like the top level, the practical takeaway we're hoping to get from this conversation is, if you are that person, if you are thinking, okay, I want to make the transition from academia to a professional career, how do I demonstrate that I would be a good hire? Yeah, building a portfolio through writing is one of the best ways to build that authority.
Mm-hmm. And authority, it's a word. You may think of it like, now we're talking about it, we're just thinking about the scientist, be it someone who's in grad school or doing their postdoc, or already a researcher doing their research and teaching. That it's authority is like a badge that you have, but authority actually, it's something. It's like a mirror that's between you and an audience. That's why also we mentioned audience on the other side. If there's no audience, there's no authority. If you're,
Right.
if you're shouting your research in the vacuum, you don't have
Right.
any authority.
Right.
And what I'd like maybe you to talk about is, what is the relationship between having this platform. Let's say we're talking about blogging, of course,
Yeah.
where you can talk differently. So in non-academic speak, you can talk to a wider audience, of course,
Yes.
in this medium. But how do you do the work of changing the way you express yourself to reach this audience? Because again, if you talk the same way on your blog than you do on a paper, it's not going to do the work you expect it to do. There's some work of, let's say, translation. Maybe it's not exactly the right word, but interpretation, popularization. Yeah, I'd like to hear what you have to say about why blogging is an interesting lab to do this work of
Sure.
learning another way to communicate your
Right. Because
science.
it creates this feedback loop that I think might not exist exactly in academia. So, um, why don't I propose something that blogging starts first with listening?
Mm.
What,
Yeah.
like, so there's an audience out there, you're seeing what they're reading, you're seeing what they're commenting on. Um, what are they missing? What don't they understand? What are they caring about? And that's the prompt, right? That's the writing prompt. And then let me, um, and then you think, well, how can I explain that to them? I think just having that goal in mind, or that, like, we call these user stories. It's like, what
Mm-hmm.
is what is the audience? What problem am I solving for the audience? Then that's the guidance for what you're going to write. And then you get this opportunity to practice, because
Mm-hmm.
they're going to respond to you, and you're going to get a chance to understand, how what they did understand and what they didn't. Um, so I mean, I'm thinking of strange examples just that are in the news today, but I was like,
Yeah.
uh, it's like suddenly people are promoting raw milk, and it's just like, okay, turns out there's a lot of science about the health dangers of raw milk, even though, probably if someone handed you a glass of raw milk, you could drink it and you'd be fine, right? It's not like so dangerous that you couldn't have a glass. But statistically, this is not like a practice that's worth promoting, if you're reading the paper.
Yeah.
So that topic gets so oversimplified in the news, and it turns into a fight, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Of
it
course.
gets polarized. And here is this chance for, someone in health science to come through and say, well, let me explain, like, kind of the breadth of research that's going on here, and what I think might be going on in the cutting edge. Or um same, there's like still, I think we're litigating, the general public is litigating the response to COVID, and
Mm.
they're litigating it in a really polarized way. And
Yeah.
like here, it's just begging for academics to come through and say, well, here's the data we have, and
Mm-hmm.
let me package that up for you.
Yeah.
um and it's not always science. History, right? It feels like political norms are getting stretched right now, and so I always like to have a historian come through and say, well, here's how that's played out, in
Yeah. Yeah.
other
Yeah.
in other countries, right? So it is kind of like, start with what's trending, start with what is uh, people are already talking about, and then find some way to contribute to that. I think that just that simple trick will put you in a mindset that's different than, you're, publishing,
Of
like
course.
traditional academic publishing.
I find it really, really interesting because, well, one of the things that happens when you're doing research and you're publishing is, well, when you publish your paper, you probably know the names of the people who are going to read your
Right.
article. And here you're talking about having a chance to, if you start by listening, to have direct connection and maybe even direct exchange with people that are outside of that circle
Hmm.
of colleagues and students, or and people like I said, this kind of small circle of people are going to read your paper and are in your specialty. So I feel it's enticing in a certain way, and it could be a great motivation to start thinking, if you are not already doing this type of writing and of being out there. But you talked about a kind of a feedback loop, and so apart from this aspect of adding um, this like two-way aspect to your science communication, which like, and wider two-way communication, not just with the scientific community, but with the wider public audience. But I think a fringe benefit may even be that this kind of pollinizes your research, like brings you new
Hmm.
ideas that you hadn't had before. And I wonder whether you have had examples, if you have stories or examples of I don't know, articles, or writers, that that had like unexpected outcomes come of being on a platform like Medium and starting to engage in this conversation. And I know this question is coming out of the blue. If you don't, it's fine.
It's such a great question. There's a bunch of angles here that I've considered deeply and have a lot of experience with, of like the value of writing, but I'm not close enough to the academic writing, to the research paper side, to understand what prompts that research, or how that flips around. But I was reading about this week though, about how there is some trend of asking for more community engagement from academics. And so I was actually kind of wondering from you what you thought might be motivating that. Is it your question itself, that if you engage with the community, it'll sharpen what you decide to research on? Or is it kind of the reverse? If you engage with the community, your research will have more impact because you'll kind of naturally end up sharing it?
Well, the first one I think is more straight. The second one that you mentioned is more straightforward. The
Right.
impact and the authority, like we said, is I think an outcome that comes from just exposing what you do to more people. But where I find the even more interesting aspect is, and that's what I was trying to express, is you may share something, then someone reacts, be it a colleague that's reading you not in the scientific scientific papers, but in that writing, but and a colleague maybe of you're in, I don't know, genetics, and they're in ethics or in philosophy, and they see your article, and they react, and it can bring up a collaboration. It can
Right.
just spark a conversation and a question that you had never thought of.
Right.
And I think widening the ecosystem where you share what you do
Yeah.
increases the serendipitous moments of new ideas, new questions, new interactions. That's where I was going with it. Yeah.
I mean, this is definitely something that people over the history of social media have talked about, the sort of professional networking effects of just being present regularly. So, I know that social media is not for everyone, but there's some subset of every group of people, including academics, who just take to it and want to be sharing. And so then one of the things that it builds up over time is that you end up kind of connecting with a lot of people, of readers, or a lot of other people who are publishing. So this is true, this was true on Twitter or X now or whatever. It's true on Threads. It's true on, blogging, Medium especially. And then that ends up being some career asset. It's like, it never occurred to me to lead with that as a benefit, because most people want a benefit that occurs like this year at least, right? But it is a thing, like my generation that came up with blogging, and then I completely glossed over this part of my career, but I was part of the team that launched Twitter, actually. So I'm like Twitter user number 6 or something. So I have been there from maybe an hour after it launched. That was when I joined, and so if you kind of fold it into how you work, you're absolutely going to end up with a very interesting network that opens up career opportunities that other people just won't have. It is one of the long-term ways that writing in public ends up being a career differentiator.
Yeah, I have someone here, Mary Gaiden, who's saying she was going to ask that question. So I think this is
We did well.
resonating with with people people watching. Thank you, Mary, for your comment. Yeah. So now another question also has to do with people who are listening, who are researchers or scientific scientific professionals outside of academia who are hearing this this idea of, okay, I can start communicating what I do to a wider audience in a different language. So I'm going to have to learn this language. I'm going to have to spend some time now in my week, put it on my agenda to write. Um, how do you start this habit or this routine of doing this now? Because you anyway, you can imagine time. Time is one of the big concerns of, well, when we're talking of graduate students, of course, it's a huge concern because
Yeah.
their time is very limited. But even academics who have so much on their plate, uh, how do you start getting yourself into this habit of learning this new medium, learning this new language, and doing? I imagine that you're going to say, at least a little bit every week, a little bit every 2 weeks. How would you tell someone who's not doing it to inch towards starting to do it little by little until they fall into a habit?
I hate these like rules of success. Like, oh, it has to be a habit once a week right now. It's like you have like academics have a bunch of advantages that other people don't have. Like a lot of the rules of success are meant for people that have nothing going for them and that are like trying to create something out of nothing, right? And so what I find with like kind of the whole category of people that already have this huge amount of knowledge in their head, right? Doesn't have to be, it doesn't require new research. It's already right there. Is like a lot of times, maybe there's like 5 things that they've been dying to get off their plate. And it's just like write those 5 things. And then you might not write, the urge to write again might not happen again for another 3 years. But
Okay.
meanwhile, those 5 things, they're a
Oh,
portfolio.
there.
They work, they don't expire, and I see that in a lot of the professionals who they're amateur writers, but professionals who write that they don't have to write every week. They just have to write a handful of compelling pieces and don't write again until you have something to say. So there's like so much of it. The advice I think you like have to understand is coming for what people call the creator economy, or for influencers who have to build and maintain an audience, and that does require being on some sort of content treadmill. And this is just like absolutely not the case for the goals of an academic. So that's like the first thing, like just the mindset.
Well, that's
Second
very
thing,
reassuring. That's very reassuring because I know it's one of the questions: how I'm going to add this to my plate. So
yeah.
no stress there.
And then the other thing is these are like my life hacks, right? If I feel like writing, if I feel like, oh, I just want to get something out, which sometimes I just feel like the muscle of writing is important. I look for my drafts, my emails, my long text messages, right? Like a lot of times you already wrote most of it, right? It's like, oh, your cousin emailed you. I mean, to go back to raw milk, and it's like, hey, the nutrition industrial complex is evil, and I'm only going to drink raw milk from here on out. And you're like, oh, okay, let me talk you out of this or something, right? So you already wrote it, right? That's a blog post. Put a title on it, do an edit pass probably, but it's there. And then this and then the slightly harder version of that is that is just to understand a lot of people that talk about time it takes to write something have to do research. Like it's like if you talk to a reporter to write something really smart, they had to spend like a month digging into it, right? And you already did that work, right? Just like right off there's a lot that I think you can just write off the top of your head. I always find that subject matter experts are just like, sort of writing to think. You're organizing thoughts and knowledge that you already have, and you don't have to write you're not writing a book. You're taking some subtopic and just like fleshing it out.
Okay. So, because often, okay, it's true that I'm coming maybe from the angle of the content creator.
You are a content creator.
Yeah. And that's maybe how. Yeah, that's probably where that question came from. But also, one thing we're told or we learn when we're content creators is, you know, there's you should, when you're when you're writing a piece or when you're preparing something, you should have always someone in mind, like a persona,
Sure.
you know.
Persona. Yeah.
Yeah. And there you just mentioned, oh, I was thinking about this message that I was writing to my
Cousin.
brother-in-law
Yeah.
about raw milk, and
Yeah.
that's your persona, right?
Right.
How how does that work? Because when you're writing a scientific paper, the persona is another scientist, another scientist in your
Mhm.
domain who has all, all the background, who expects heavy jargon, who da 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 da.
Right.
How do you recommend like
Yeah.
creating a persona like I did before starting the podcast, or is there a more organic, simple way of doing it so that your voice is your voice when you're
Yeah.
writing, but it's not
Yeah.
the academic voice?
I mean, you're probably right that the main thing is just to start, right? Like you learn by doing, and it's free to start, and it's there's no downside really to bad writing. Like people don't see it typically,
Hmm.
and if you end up being embarrassed by what you write, take it down, right? But as you get a little bit further, I'll give you what I think is the good kind of mindset, which is there's 3 drafts.
Okay.
First draft, you write it for yourself. Like
Mm.
you have an idea in mind, get that idea out on paper. Like don't worry about other people so much as just what are you trying to, um, uh, how do these thoughts work together? Second draft, uh, there's poetic license here. Second draft is for your fans, the people that are like already kind of interested in this topic and are going to um, basically understand it. So then you have to say, okay, well, I wrote the first draft for myself. What do I have to kind of add into that? What don't they know? Fans, is what you're saying, this target audience that you're going for. Like, who are they? Who are you? What type of person are you writing to? And then the third draft for your haters. These are the people
Oh.
that are going to actively misunderstand it. And so then you just go through and you say, all right, where could this be misunderstood? Let me just strengthen that a little bit. I think that's like a pretty good kind of basic mindset for writing in public. And if your starting point is you're answering something that's going on already, like if you're prompted by what's going on in the world, you already have a target audience in mind. Get your thoughts out, write for the people that are going to tend to agree with your thoughts, and that's the first kind of editing pass, and then do it as a double check at the end for the haters. And haters is such a poetic license is what I meant. It's like
Yeah.
just like there's people that just are they're going to misunderstand what you're saying, and you can catch that early. And that I
That's a great process.
I saw, Atul Gawande, who is a doctor who wrote the Checklist Manifesto. I don't know if you know him, but
I've heard of him in another podcast.
right. He, I saw him speak once, and he was talking about the article he wrote for the New Yorker that turned into this book, the Checklist Manifesto. And he said the editor at the New Yorker had sent the article back to him for 26 revisions. And I was like, my head exploded because I just that's something I don't have time for. Like, I'm never going to do 26 edit passes.
Wow.
But 3 is about like where great blogging lives, I think.
Okay. And I really like it because, well, 3 is kind of a magic number, right?
Yeah. So
And
first for yourself, second for the fans, third for the
for
haters.
the haters, and the fact that it's layered like that,
Mhm.
it makes it so logical. I'm sure the audience is going to be able to retain it
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
makes total sense. Now, haters. So you talked about poetic license. They're out there. Trolls are out there. We're in that
Sure.
era, right?
Yeah.
And very often, people who decided to stay in the lab and study and do a PhD, whatever, are not. How can I say? Are maybe more introverted, but especially once maybe they're in professors and they're in the public eye, there is this fear in the community of being victimized by this troll troll agenda.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, what do you have to say to people who are afraid of maybe starting something like that, a public place where they kind of not only share something but also expose themselves more, show, open their flank maybe to
Sure.
critique, to trolling, to questioning. What's your reflection on that, and how do we kind of relax people about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think absolutely just being anywhere on public social media means you get some level of, I mean, I'll just say, I think of it as innocuous, angry, ill-informed comments. And the best thing is, there's a saying, don't feed the trolls. Like, just don't respond. If it's not in good faith, then it's not worth your time. They're not inviting you to participate. They're trying to create an argument because that feels good to them in some way. But that's their agenda. It's not your agenda. You don't have to buy into it. So that's probably like the number one skill of deciding who you're going to engage with or not. And most social media has tools for blocking and muting and hiding various comments. And it's just that, like, 99% of what you should do is walk away, ignore, block, hide. Like, it's just not, it's like a little bit of the cost of being in public. I think it's actually very rare for people to get targeted beyond that. Although maybe, some of your listeners are like in a field where they feel like, suddenly the public political debate is centered on their field, and maybe they like will be a target. And so at some level, it's like, well, you wish you could get a message that was so dangerous to one side that they would target you. I mean, it's still, I think, fairly unlikely. But it's, I think sometimes it's like part of the calculus of how important do you think your message is to get it out to the world. And I think if there's like kind of strong inauthentic backlash, that's usually a sign that your message is really important. And yeah, it's just, you learn, again, one of those things you learn from experience. Don't pay a lot of attention to it, is I think how most people handle it. I don't, David, like, do you have trolls? What do they,
No.
like, you have a comment right now that's like, it's sort of, this is a spammer, essentially.
It's a spammer. Yeah.
Pitching their services in the middle of a live podcast. And it's like, okay, what are we going to do?
Ignore.
Ignore, right.
And actually, I can very quickly. This is not about me, but share a story of at the beginning of the podcast. Now, it's called Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD for different reasons. One of them is people were asking me too often, is it about parenting in graduate school? And then I said, okay, because it was just Papa PhD in the beginning. But in one of, I think, season 2, I got one comment, and it was after it was on this. This interview with the researcher in France, and it was about, this is a very patriarchal podcast, look at the name, and it's two guys talking about na. And then what I did, because so this person clearly something in her was, I don't know, was triggered, and I engaged with her, and I tried to understand where she was coming from, and actually I told her what the story was, and Papa PhD because it works in French and English. This is a bilingual podcast, and also because my transition from being in graduate school to after was also becoming a dad, and that's why I called it Papa PhD. And then she actually became, I diffused the situation, and I think she actually became a fan. So, depending on if it's really just inauthentic and spammy or whatever, or your spider sense tells you, okay, this person maybe is just not understanding what's happening, you can still engage and diffuse. So, but
I think that that's a pattern I've seen a lot too, and the way that I understand it is that a lot of times people sound mean because they're anxious that you won't listen to them. And so they ramp up their rhetoric. They dial it up, just almost like to get your attention, partly, but also I think because they're experiencing a lot of anxiety. And if you can just acknowledge that you see them as a person, like a lot of times that'll ramp down. Like I see that
Exactly
in
what
support
happened.
tickets. When the
Oh
first
yeah.
company, it's like you F you, blah blah blah, you're ruining my day. It's like, oh, hi, I'm Tony. How can I help you? And they're like, oh, thanks. I'm so glad I have your attention. And it's like, hey, you were just like cursing me out, 10 seconds ago. What happened here? And it's like, they just didn't think you were going to take them seriously. And as soon as you take them seriously, they ramp it down. If they don't ramp it down, it might not be worth your time. That's the way. Right.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting how, like you said, the fact that it's all of this, the whole part of this conversation is first is one way, and second is anonymous to a certain point,
Yeah.
but it's not face to face.
Yeah.
And then once you humanize the person, it kind of
Yeah.
comes back to normal.
Yeah.
It's exactly what I experienced. Now, the other thing people are afraid of is controversy. You just mentioned people who might be in, I don't know, working in public health,
Sure.
etc. Just think about the COVID, the COVID pandemic, etc. There's also fear out there of being caught in controversies, and for sure, like physicians have during COVID and after COVID have been in some sorts of how can I say, like storms, media storms, because of opinions that they emitted, that maybe came out a little bit out of the purview of the scientific consensus. Let's say.
Sure.
But you also said, and I really appreciated from what you said, if something that you published somehow is not jiving anymore, or you just take it off. You just take it. You just remove it, because you have agency over all of the content that you publish in a blog, right? You are
absolutely.
and that's an important point. So you have you have the hands on the wheel. You're the one deciding where it goes. You can, and I've seen this, and actually some of the podcasts that I've been listening to that I like a lot is where people, and they're like related to science, where people actually during the podcast show how their opinion, even their scientific opinion, evolves throughout exploring a question. And so you have the right to change. You have the right to remove or to edit or to I imagine publish a version 2 of what I published 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's, if you think of it as a portfolio, it's like everything that you have online should represent what you want to be saying right now. And if you want to take it down, take it down, or revise it for sure. I think sometimes people really appreciate the history, and to say like, oh, here's where I was, and here's how I've updated my thinking, and that can be trust building for some people. And you got into, I think, this important question. I want to come back to it, like, who are you, who are you writing for? Who are you communicating for? And I think, again, this is one of the ways that the creator economy, the advice that's built for influencers, ends up misleading people like who we're talking to today, where it's like, it starts to sound like a numbers game. Like, here, I'll call out this spammer in your comments who's like pitching how to get a certain number of downloads. And it's like, that's how people who sell advertising think. They want a certain number of eyeballs. But your audience is trying to reach and influence specific types of people, and so I end up like having to like kind of coach people or guide people away from thinking in terms of the numbers and thinking in terms of like, write to impress someone important, write to impress someone smart, right? And I think that's important to keep in mind here when you're saying, oh, should I take it down or not, right? It's like, maybe leaving it up is bad for the haters, but maybe the haters don't matter to you, because you are trying to build trust with a certain audience that's like actually going to respect you for being able to change your mind, right? Like being able to change your mind is one of the hardest things to do, and it's one of the kind of most important if you're actually seeking the truth, right? So like if I saw someone change their mind, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna pay attention to this person, right?
Yeah.
But if you're thinking just in terms of raw numbers or like raw popularity, you might miss that as an opportunity.
Of course. Of course. And just a practical thing, I was thinking, if let's say you believed something 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and now you've changed, because on a blog you're the master of the whole content. You
Yeah.
can actually go back to that article, at the 5 years ago article, and say at the beginning, say, by the way, you can read this article, but don't miss the update that I published
Yeah.
now in
Yep. Right.
2024, and kind of help people navigate
Yeah.
this change with you. And I think I agree with you, build trust in you, because first you're showing, my opinion changes, and here I'm going to show you how and why. I think it makes total sense.
This is one of the reasons I think a lot of people turn to blogging is they want control over what they publish. Sometimes it's really nice to get into a journal. Obviously, like your career depends on that sometimes, but sometimes it's also really nice to be able to say it exactly how you want to say it, and have complete control over the packaging of it, which is what blogging gives you that power.
Yeah. Tony, I just noticed that we're reaching the end of the interview. I wonder whether there was some reflection that you had that we didn't talk about. But if not, I'm going to try to kind of recap what I'm taking home from our conversation. Is there something we didn't cover? We went wide,
we
right?
went wide, right? I mean, to take this back to careers, like people trying to switch careers.
Yes.
I had this realization recently. Actually, wrote a letter or email to one of my college professors. Now, like, I graduated 24 years ago, and to thank her. And it was my basic humanities 101 professor. And what I told her is that her class alone was more valuable to my career than my entire computer science degree. So it's like I went to college thinking I need to have a marketable skill. I need to come out being able to get a job, got a computer science degree, got a degree as a programmer, had a career in tech. Like very valuable degree, very valuable what I learned in college. But the thing that let me then get into management, into leadership, into entrepreneurship, the thing that got me at least 3 different jobs and got me promoted as well is that I was a plausibly good writer. And the person who turned me into a plausibly good writer was this humanities professor who said, and I think my opening line to her is, I think was, I was in your class at this time, and I just want to thank you for being such a difficult person to write for. And she was a difficult person. She insisted that it was short, succinct, always pushed harder to think more deeply, even though I wasn't, she wasn't asking us to write a lot, but she was asking us to write really sharply. And that the value of writing, which is, really what we're talking about, it ends up being the difference between a mediocre career and a great career, right? It's like you can build marketable skills and get a professional job, but the thing that's going to let you really like thrive in that job is how well do you communicate with people. And I think it's like this is the case for writing just to write, even if you don't have a big audience, right? It's nothing more than building out the skill of being able to communicate your knowledge. And if you can do that, all sorts of professional doors end up opening for you.
I really love it, and it's a beautiful testament to this person's importance
in my life and a lot of
in your
people's
life,
lives.
in a lot of people's lives. Makes me think, I should thank some people too.
Which professors deserve an email today is a good kind of
really
ending question. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm seriously going to be thinking about that and writing something, because some people have been important. and I don't know, we don't think about these things every day. Tony, it's a great uh, place to finish. I still want to give a small kind of recap of my take homes, but before that, I want to ask you. Of course, people who are watching see your Medium URL here, coachtony.medium.com. But people who are listening or watching, where can they say thank you for this conversation, for this podcast? Where can they write you or reach out to you to ask questions? You're on LinkedIn, of course.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm like my social media platform of choice right now is Threads.
Okay.
It's sort of been a Twitter exodus, and that's where if you want to like get into discussion with me, I tend to be there. And of course, like anyone who's wanting to write on Medium, happy to take an email from you. I'm Tony@medium.com is my email address, and probably what I'll send you is literally just a link. And we did just publish a really good guide for academics who want to get into blogging, and probably maybe we'll end up getting that into the show notes.
Sure.
But yeah, I really I think Medium is a blogging platform that's really designed to help academics thrive as they get into sharing their ideas and knowledge. And so I'd love to see more of your listeners writing over on our platform, writing on Medium.
Perfect. Well, I think first I'm going to share all the links that you've mentioned in the show notes, of course. I think it's a great, non-threatening, very empowering way to express himself. So I do recommend they write to you. They get the like you said, the this manual, or this, I don't know how you call it. Kind of
It's a blog post.
it's a blog post. There you go, on how to do it.
Yeah.
But for me, where before asking you for a last word of inspiration for people out there, I really feel from what you shared today and from what we exchanged, that what you're proposing is that for academics, they're
Yeah.
in this kind of marathon, they're in full marathon attire, shoes, running,
Yeah.
that very like paced running towards this goal that's quite far away, breathing hard, etc. And it feels to me that this exercise of blogging, of expressing yourself through writing
Yeah.
on a blog, is like if they at the middle or at some point, some milestone during this marathon, they can stop and sit and breathe and let their research breathe, let their scientific brain breathe in a metaphoric way, and kind of, instead of being in this very focused kind of tunnel vision mode, open their radar for a little bit as they're breathing, and that allows them to let their ideas sit, exchange with other people,
Yeah.
get possibilities of collaborating maybe with someone else, but also just being inspired by someone else who they would not have crossed paths with. And then after this break, they can come back to their research activity without the pressure of, like you said, publishing every week or whatever. That's something that's really a big point of what you said today for them, is don't put pressure on yourself to make this content creation endeavor.
Yeah.
It's a place to breathe, and
Yeah.
I think that's the idea, or the metaphor that's sitting with me at the end of this conversation.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, absolutely. You trust that you have a lot to say, and when you do, say it. You don't have to treat it as a game or any of this hokey, publish 5 times a week at 9:35 a.m. kind of advice like that. None of that applies to what any of your listeners. It's much more, like what's your mission in the world? We all see how misinformed everyone is, and here are these topics that each of your listeners know deeply, and it's like almost your duty to share and educate the world. And hey, good news, it's also going to be good for your career. So there's a practical reason to do it, but it's more just this opportunity when you have something to say. Now blogging gives people a way to say that.
Yeah. Good.
All right.
Tony, I think this is a great last word. Uh, Unless you have a last, maybe I always like to actually in the end think about the person who's really kind of scared of taking the leap. You've mentioned you've already mentioned a bunch of ways how this is not menacing in any way. It's not pressure. You're not putting pressure on yourself. But for someone who maybe thinks, oh, I'm not a good writer, maybe English is not my first language, do you have a last word to finish the podcast of encouragement or enticement to this person who's kind of having these like thoughts, limiting thoughts, let's say?
From experience, like having worked with a lot of people, like I'm Coach Tony for a reason, from a prior work. It's actually downplaying the work sometimes is counterproductive, because then people get into it and think, oh, this is abnormal, how hard writing is. Meanwhile, it's like that quote, writing is easy, all I do is sit at a typewriter and bleed. Like that is like, look, writing is hard. It is true, writing is hard, but it's also fun. It's like intellectual. You feel smarter by the end of it. There's something just inherently healthy about it. So it's more, I would say it's worthy. Like writing is a worthy goal for everyone who's listening, and you're going to get something out of it, even if you're not great at it on day one. And no one is a great writer on day one. You come on, we get good at things by practicing. And so you're never going to get good. You're never going to be a better writer unless you try. And the blogging lowers that barrier to entry, because you get to try, you get to test it out pretty quickly and test it out with an audience.
Marvelous. Tony, thank you so much for this great conversation. I really, really enjoyed this time with you. I think you made a great point of why people should try, even just try, and also try without putting any pressure on themselves. And that's, I think, the key, especially for this population of people. So yeah, thank you so much for having been on the show. It's been really a great pleasure. I think a lot of value for the audience.
Well, I hope so. Then, of course, happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you, David, for having me, and it's been a pleasure being here.
Pleasure. And for I see Jennifer here saying she'd love to connect. Tony@medium.com. And for me, it's David@papaphd.com. We have very simple email addresses, which is cool.
Yep.
So yeah, don't hesitate to connect, and I'll see you. Thanks for everyone who has been. There's a bunch of you live. Thanks for all of you for being here. It's always great to have a large audience. And see you in the next recording of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. In the meantime, if you like these types of conversations, go on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whichever listening platform, and follow Beyond the Thesis. It's the best way to not miss any of these conversations. So thanks again, and see you on the next live recording of the show.